We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Dalet of Beis in Mesches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 64b. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Hamnuna says, Nazir v'osa Pesach. Let's say you have a Nazir, or let's say you have someone bringing a carbon Pesach, Shaholchu bekever hatahom, and they walk in an area where there's a grave that is buried in the deep, B'shvi shelahen, and it's on the seventh day of their purification. The halacha is tahorim. In that situation, we do apply the leniency of kever hatahom, and we say they are tahor. And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Dolo alima tumas hatahom lemister. We don't say that tumas hatahom is strong enough to undo the count, let's say by a Nazir. He won't have to recount in terms of the term of his Nazirus. Rashi explains, Amar Rav Hamnuna Nazir v'yosa Pesach, shenitmu b'tumas meis. The case is a Nazir, or a person bringing carbon Pesach, they were tummy meis, v'huza alein begimel uveshvi, and they were sprinkled upon the third day and the seventh day. They went through the purification process. Now it's the last day of that process. V'holchu bekever hatahom b'shvi shalahen, and then on that seventh day they walked in an area of kever hatahom. V'lo noda la'osa Pesach ad shasa pischo, and the person who brought carbon Pesach had no idea that had happened. He only knew about it after he brought his carbon Pesach. U'lenazir ad shaman and Naziruso, and also by the Nazir also, he had started his new count, and he counted the full term. V'gilach le'nazirus tahara, and he already shaved for the Nazirus of purity, and then he found out about this tumas hatahom. So in both of these cases, says Rav Hamnuna, tahorim, they're pure. V'afagav de nitmu b'shvi shalahen. Now, even though really they had become tamei on that seventh day, and therefore there should be a problem here. The lo alima hach tumas hatahom lemister, but we say no, the tumas hatahom doesn't undo what was already done. Ho'elu kvar avar, since everything passed. V'nitar l'cheshenitma b'tumas hatahom, and he was ending the purification process at the time of tumas hatahom. Again, Rav Hamnuna is saying that is all part of the leniency of tumas hatahom. And the Gemara continues, Mesiv Rava. So Rava asks on Rav Hamnuna from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about a case of Nazir, and it says, Yarad et li toher mitumas hameis, that if the Nazir is going to purify himself, he's in the process purifying himself from tumas meis, Tameh, he's going to be Tameh in that case, even by a case of Tumas hatahom. Shecheskas Tameh, Shecheskas tar. And the Mishnah had explained, since there he has the presumptive status of being Tameh, he's Tameh. In a case where it would not be that, in a case where he wouldn't have that status, he would be tar. Rashi explains, Mesiv Rava Yarad Litvol V'litar Mitumas Hameis. He's going down in order to purify himself from Tumas Meis. V'nimtza Meis Meshuka B'karka Amoret. Then it turns out there was a mace buried in the ground in the cave. Tameh Shecheskas Tameh. He's Tameh because of his chazaka. So the Gemara says, V'hachanami here also, Kevan Dahavi B'cheskas Tameh B'shvi Shalo. It should be the same thing in Rav Hamnuna's case. He has a chazaka being Tameh still on the seventh day. Kishenidma B'kever hatahom. That's the moment when he comes in contact with the kever hatahom. Lafisha adayin lo gilach teglachas tumah de Nazirus. At this point in time, he hasn't yet shaved at the end of his Nazirus of impurity. V'lo harav shimsho, the sun hasn't set. The teglachas la'achar b'yasmaimu, because the shaving only occurs after he immerses himself in water. Like we said earlier, so why is it Rav Hamnuna saying tar in this case? We should say what our Mishnah said. We should say, like the Mishnah said, that he has a chazaka of being tameh, and therefore he is going to be tameh. That's Rava's question against Rav Hamnuna. So Amar Leiser, Rav Hamnuna said to Rava, Modina lach, actually, I admit to you, you're actually correct by Nazir. What I said is only true by carbon Pesach. Modina lach ben Nazir shemechusar teglachas. I admit to you by a Nazir, even though it's the seventh day, but he is still lacking an action that's going to finish purifying him, and that is the action of shaving. And since he hasn't yet shaven, therefore you're correct, he does have a chazaka of tumah, and he's considered to be tameh. Rashi says, Amar lei Modina lach ben Nazir, I admit to you by Nazir, dekevan denitma b'yom shvi shalo, if he becomes tameh with tumas hatahom in that seventh day, kodem teglachas the tameh. If it happens before he shaved, he's tameh. V'afilu ki lo noda lo ad achar giluach. Now, even though he only found out about it after shaving, the tahara, after that shaving by the Nazirus of tahara, mishum de mechusar teglachas tumah ki nitma b'kever hatahom. But still, I admit to you, in this case, since he hadn't shaved in terms of the shaving that's done for the impurity, so therefore he is going to be tameh by this situation of tumas hatahom. So essentially, Rav Hamnuna admitted to Rava that the halacha by Nazir is that we would be strict. Amar le Rava, so Rava said to him, Rava said back to Rav Hamnuna, Af ana modina loch, I also admit to you, ba'osa Pesach, I admit to you by the case of carbon Pesach that we're lenient in that case. And Rava continues, Delo mechusar v'lo klum, because in that case there's really nothing lacking. By the case of carbon Pesach on that seventh day, really he is going to become pure. It's the last day of the process, and so therefore in that situation by tumas hatahom we would be lenient. Amar le Abaye, so Abaye said to him, he said to Rava, what do you mean there's nothing lacking? There is something lacking because you need to wait for the sun to go down, for the purity to set in. And to that, Rava said, Amar le, so Rava said back to him, Shimsha memela arva, the sun setting, that happens automatically, and therefore that's not considered to be lacking anything. And Rashi explains the lo mechusar v'lo klum. Again, by the case of Karban Pesach, there's nothing lacking. The point is, he has a presumption of tar. Ki nitma bekever atom on that seventh day when he comes in contact with the kever atom. Umisveika lo machsin leituma kidetnan shecheskas tar. It's a case of suffix. We're not going to say he's tamei. He has a presumption of being tar. So Amar Lei, so he said to Mosa Pesach nami biyom zayin shelo kam mechusar harav shemesh. Now there is something lacking in the case of Karban Pesach. On the seventh day, he needs the sun to set. V'kamar decheskas tamei. We should say he has a presumption of being tamei. Memela arvin, the Gemara responded, no, that happens automatically. That's as if he's not missing any component in terms of the purification process. And the Gemara continues, V'yaf Abaye Haderbe, and Abaye himself, he also retracted from what he said, and he too understood that Harav Shemesh is something that's considered to come Memela, it comes automatically. Titania, as we learned in a Braisa, Yom Melos Tavi, Toch Melos Lo Tavi. This is talking about a woman who is counting days of Tumma and Tahara after she gives birth. So it says if she has a miscarriage after she's finished the count, she has to bring an additional carbon for that miscarriage. But if she's within the days of her counting, she does not need to bring an additional carbon. And the Braisa continues, Yachal Lo Tavi Aleda Shalifnei Melos. So I might have thought she does not bring on a miscarriage that takes place again while she is still counting. Avol Tavi Aleda Shalachar Melos. But maybe she should bring an additional carbon if that miscarriage takes place after she's concluded counting. And we will see in Rashi over here, we're talking about where she had two miscarriages in this situation. V'tipater mishtein, and she should be pater from both of them. I might have thought that. Talmud lomar, so the Braisa says that the pasuk says, Uvimlos yimei tahara, b'yom melos tavi, toch melos lo tavi. Again, it's only if it's at the day of her completion of counting, only then does she bring an additional carbon. But if she's still counting days, so then again, the Braisa says, she does not bring an additional carbon. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Kahana says, Shani hacha de mechasra carbon. It's different over here because she's still lacking in terms of bringing a carbon. And what Rav Kahana means to say is that any time you have a situation where this mother who gave birth to a child is mechasra carbon, she's not at a time yet where she can bring her carbon. So if she is not at that time, and at that point in time she has a miscarriage, so she is pater from bringing an additional carbon. And so the Gemara then says, Hasam nami, but 1 second, if that's the svara, so over there also, mechasra harav shemesh, even in a situation where she's at the end of the term of her counting, so it's true she's at a situation where in theory she could bring a carbon, but that's not really true. She has to wait for the sun to set, and only then can she bring a carbon. So why do we say that at the end of the term, if she has a miscarriage, it's considered to be a time where she's already obligated in carbon, and therefore she has to bring an additional carbon? Why do we say that? And so here we see Abaye's retraction. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye said back to him, Shimsha memela arva. The sunset happens automatically. Therefore, it's not considered that she's lacking anything. She's already considered at the end of that count of her days. She's considered to be holding at a time when she already is obligated to bring the carbon, and she can bring the carbon. And therefore, again, if she has a miscarriage at that point in time, she will have to bring an additional carbon. And Rashi explains, Titania, as we learned in a Braisu, V'mlosi meitara leveno labas v'gomer. Again, we're talking about when she completes counting the days of Tahara, if she gave birth to a son or a daughter, Yom melos tavi, so if it's completed, if her days of counting are complete, so she brings an additional carbon. Im chazra v'hipila b'yom melos. But again, what we mean is, let's say she has a miscarriage on the day where she has finished that count. L'zachar, for a male, dahainu b'yom arboim ve'echad, that would be a count of 41 days. L'zachar, v'yom pei aleph l'nekeva, would be a count of 81 days for a nekeva, for if she gave birth to a girl. So in that situation, it's already the 41st day, or it's already the 81st day, and then she has a miscarriage. So then tavi shtei karbanas. Then, like we said above, she has to bring 2 karbanas. Avalal also sheyolda b'soch melos. But let's say there was a miscarriage that happened while she was still counting. Lo tavi, that she doesn't have to bring a carbon for that. Diamar akra, because that's learned from the pasuk. Because the pasuk says, "Zos Torah sayoledes haTorah ribsal kamav lodas sheyesh la b'soch yimei leida." What the Torah is saying is, even if she has many babies, so she has these miscarriages during the while she's counting the days, shemevian carbon echad. The halach is she just has to bring 1 carbon. V'yocheles bekachim, and then she's considered pure. She can have kachim. Ve'in hashar lechover. There's no obligation to bring karbanas for those other children, for those other births. Yachol lo tavi avel tavi al shalachar melos. So now the Bryce had said, well, what happens if you have a situation, as we said, talking about like 2 miscarriages, meaning she'em yolda nekeva besoch shmonim. Let's say you have a situation where she gives birth to a female, and that's during the count. It's during the count of the 80 days. Ula'achar she'avru pei derishon, and now from the first birth that she had, 80 days have gone by, but Chazra v'yolda nekeva, then she has another female, Besoch Shmonim Shel Shnia, and she's still within the count of that second one, of that first miscarriage, so to speak. So Yachol Shetavi Karban Al Harishona V'Al Hashlisha. So in that situation, I might think that she can bring one carbon on the first and on the third, that she has to bring a carbon, Lefishu La'achar Melos Shel Rishona, because it's already after the conclusion of the first one, meaning to say she has to bring two carbonos, I might think, and she can't take care of it all at once. Talmud Lomer Uvim the pasuk says no, Uvim Los, the mashma calls man sheyolda biyom melos b'shosha ru'uya lahavi carbon teschayev v'carbon al shtein. What it really means is, only if she gives birth on the day when she was fit to bring a carbon already, then she has to bring two carbonos. Avol toch melos, but if she's in the middle of counting, lo tavi, she doesn't have to bring an additional carbon. V'zu hoel v'besoch melos shel shnia lo tavi. And here, since she's still within the count of that second birth, so therefore on that third birth, she doesn't have to bring an additional carbon. And Rashi continues, Amar Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana said, Kilomar, what we mean to say is as follows. V'yamar Rav Kahana Allah, Rav Kahana said on that, Dahi shani hacha beleda delachar melos, my time alone mechayva. Why is it again that she's not chayiv in the situation where she gave birth and she was still in the middle of the count for that second birth? Leisuya la carbon. Why doesn't she need to bring a carbon? Mishum de mechasra carbon de chol chada v'chada de mesyal de la have b'shasha inu ruya la haviva carbon. The point is, every time she had a birth over there, it was at a time when she couldn't bring the carbon because she was still in the middle of counting. Umusvinan Allah. So on Rav Kahana's explanation, we asked, Dahi hasam but even in that case also, let's say it's already the 81st day, Amai Maisa carbon, why there does she have to bring, let's say she has a miscarriage on that day, why does she have to bring an additional carbon? Hamachasra Harif Shemesh, because doesn't she still need to wait for the sun to set to really be fit to bring a carbon for that first birth? Because the halacha is that a woman who gives birth, she immerses twice. She does immerse again on that 81st day. Even though she immersed after 14 days, there's another immersion after what's called the Yemei Tahara. The woman who gives birth, she has Yemei Tumah, and she immerses after the Yemei Tumah, and then she immerses again after the Yemei Tahara. Machmas Leida Kedei Latir Lachol B'Kachim. She needs that other immersion in order to eat Kachim. Kedetanan Mesches Chagiga B'Perachomer B'Kodesh Sha'onen V'Amachosar Kippurim Tzrichin Tvila LaKodesh. There needs to be this immersion to have to be able to have Kachim. Utzrichin Harav Shemesh, and there's a requirement to wait for the sun to set. The Hainu Tvul Yom Aruch. That's what we call a Tvul Yom, somebody who immersed that day, but in this case it's called a Tvul Yom Aruch. Sha'afal Pisha Tavla L'Sof Yadalit, even though she immersed after 14 days, Eina Ocheles B'Kachim at Sof Pei Aleph, she's not able to eat Kachim until the end of the 81st day, Utzricha Harav Shemesh, and she needs to wait for the sun to set. And the Rosh adds some explanation. Hasam nami hamachaser harav shemesh. There also, isn't she lacking that she has to wait for the sun to go down? Perish again. The explanation is hamapelas yom pei aleph. If somebody has a miscarriage, if she has a miscarriage on the 81st day, the kaimalan demivia beis karbonis. In that case, we said she brings two karbonis, diaf or lishmonim viechad mechayvi ba beis karbonis. And that means to say, even on the evening of that 81st day, she has to bring two karbonis if she has a miscarriage at that time. V'amai hamachaser harav shemesh. Why do we say that? She's not really at a time where she could bring the first carbon. She has to wait for the sun to go down. And the Rosh asks on this line in the Gemara, Tema, it's a wonder. What does the Gemara even mean when it says she has to wait for the sun to go down? Because really what happens by a woman who gives birth is she immerses after the 2 weeks. At that point in time, normally a person who immerses waits for the sun to set that very day. But in this case, by a woman who gives birth, so it's called Tvulas Yom Aruch, she has to wait all of the Yemei Tahara. And she's asked to have Truma ad or Lepei Aleph until the evening of the 81st. V'zeu Harav Shemesh Allah, and that actually is the Harav Shemesh. So what do we mean over here that she still has to wait? And so the Rosh explains what the Gemara means is as follows. V'yesh lomar, we can explain the Gemara as follows. Milo askinon she'ichra tvilasa ad yom peyalef. It could very well be that we're talking about a woman who didn't actually immerse on day 14, and she delayed her immersion until the 81st day. V'tzarech oz harav shemesh, and so therefore she's going to need a harav shemesh after the immersion. And so therefore ve'ena mevia kaparas ad l'machar. She won't actually be able to bring her carbon until the next day. So that could be what the Gemara is referring to. And so she's not yet ready to bring the carbon until the next day, in this case where she delayed her immersion. And nevertheless, what do we say? In any situation where there's a miscarriage on the 81st day, mevia beis karbonis. In any of those situations, she has to bring two karbonis. Even though clearly in the situation where she delayed the immersion, she's lacking harav shemesh. And the Rosh continues, Umashani Abaye, so then Abaye answered, the Shimsham Emela Arva, the sun setting is something that's considered to happen automatically, V'lo Mikra Chisar, and that's not considered missing anything. V'keivan Shemashim Mechusar Harav Shemesh Lo Mikra Chisar, and since the lacking of Harav Shemesh is not considered a Chisaron, Gam Ma She'ena Yechola Lahavi Karbonos B'Laila, Ad L'Machar Lahav Chisar, and the fact that she can't bring her Karbonos at night, she has to wait till the next day, that's not called a Chisaron. The Laila Lohav Mechusar's man. The point here of the Gemara is, according to Abaye, the nighttime is not considered lacking time. And the Rosh does continue with a second explanation along the lines of what Rashi explained. B'yesh mefarshim, there are those who explain, v'ha-mechusar harav shemesh, what does it mean she's mechusar harav shemesh? T'chinami tavla kodem tzarech litvol shenis yom payalef. That actually, when the mother immerses herself originally after the 14 days, she actually does need to do a second immersion on the 81st day, Kedetnan Mesches Chagiga, as we learned in Mesches Chagiga. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamotzi meis betchila. Let's say a person finds a corpse, and it's the first time they have found a corpse in this area, Mushkav Kedarko, and it's buried in the normal fashion, Notlo ve'est tfusaso. So the person can dig up the corpse and the area around it, and then he knows that there will not be tumah in this area. Shnayim, let's say he finds two corpses, same idea, Nodlon ve'est tfusas, and he can take them, and the earth that is surrounding, he doesn't need to assume that this is a graveyard. Matzah shlosha, however, if the person finds three corpses, if between each corpse there's something between 4 and 8 amos, harezu shchunas kvaris, that's already considered to be like a cemetery, and it has to be treated with more stringency. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Hey Amud Aleph.